Well, hello, Nativity Bible Heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Power Bible Study for the 6th Sunday after the Epiphany. This is for February 12th. We have Deuteronomy. We've been getting a whole lot of Isaiah, I think it was, in our first lesson, but we get some Deuteronomy today. The first 8 verses of Psalm 119, the longest chapter of the entire Bible, by the way, for you Bible trivia fans. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. And then we are still in Matthew's Sermon on the Mount of Jesus in chapter 5, verses 21 to 37. Let's start with Deuteronomy chapter 30. Now remember, in this period of Epiphany, by the way, this is the last Sunday before the last Sunday of Epiphany this year. There can be as many as 8 Sundays after the Epiphany. It all depends on the date of Easter. And so there's always, the last Sunday of Epiphany is always going to be the Sunday where we celebrate the Transfiguration, even though it's not technically the feast day of the Transfiguration. We always get a passage about the Transfiguration before we enter into Lent. So today we are in that 6th Sunday after Epiphany, and the passage from Deuteronomy chapter 30 is a typical Deuteronomistic piece. If you haven't read Deuteronomy lately, it is basically one big long speech of Moses. When we talk about the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the latest book. Deuteronomy is the first book of what we call the Deuteronomistic history. The Deuteronomistic history starts in Deuteronomy, and it continues through Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. And why do we call it the Deuteronomistic history? Because there are themes that we begin in Deuteronomy that continue throughout all of those books, like I just named. And it's not that the one person necessarily wrote all of that, but it is very clear that one mindset, one theological perspective dominates and predominates and bubbles up and comes up through the cracks and everything all the way through to the end of 2nd Kings. And in this passage in chapter 30 of Deuteronomy, verses 15 to 20, we get basically a summary of what that is. And here is the reading. Moses is speaking, okay? See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him and holding fast to him, for that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land that the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Oh boy. I have a long history with this passage. This was actually the passage of the first sermon I ever preached after I was I can't remember if it was a junior or a senior in college, getting my bachelor's degree. I went to the preacher and said, I think I might be feeling the Lord's call to go into the ministry. And he said, well, the only thing to do is to just go with it and test it out. And so he scheduled me to preach on a Sunday night, and this is the passage. And I remember my dad actually showed up, and it was not my best sermon, that's for sure, but it was, I did see in these words something that that really resonated within me personally. But I didn't have the whole background of this sermon. I didn't realize, of this passage. And so I didn't realize that, this is an exilic packaging of the message that was coming to the people after they had departed the land of promise. Okay, so here's where I'm going with this. So we're familiar with the fact that in the story of Israel, they do get exiled, right? There's like 2 or 3 exiles that actually happen. Around the year 586 is when the final blow happened. And scholars believe that the book of Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic history that begins with Deuteronomy gets finalized about 560, okay? This is like about 25 years or 30 years after they've been in captivity, and they're living in Babylon, okay? They're not living in the promised land. They've lost their inheritance. They've lost the temple. They are in a foreign land with foreign gods and stories about foreign gods. And the question is, how will the community of faith survive without the accoutrement of their being in Jerusalem and having the cult with the temple and all of that? In the recasting of the entry into the promised land. That's what we have in the book of Deuteronomy. All of this happens in the book of Deuteronomy. The setting for this is their entry into the promised land from centuries prior, okay? And as we recall, when they were entering Canaan, there were a lot of different religions going on, and one of the promises, or one of the temptations that was feared, was that the people would not remain faithful to the Yahwistic faith, and that they would get tempted by these materialistic religions that were around. The Canaanite religions were, I believe they were to Yahwism what the prosperity gospel is to Christianity today. It's something that's very tempting, because it basically says, hey, if you do everything just right, you're going to get everything your heart's desire. And that's not how, number one, the world works, and number two, that's not the way God works. And so in this passage today, so we have Moses speaking, okay? The whole book of Moses the whole book of Deuteronomy revolves around this speech of Moses. And this is like the end of that speech. Once this speech ends in verses 30, in chapter 31 and then following, it's not like Moses doesn't speak again. He does speak, but he dies shortly after, okay? This is like the final encapsulation. If he were to say, like, okay, you want me to put everything in a nutshell for you, here is the way things can be. It can go either good for you or it can go bad for you. It can go good for you if you do, if you keep the instruction. That's the best way to interpret the word, or translate the word Torah, by the way, instruction, even though in the Greek Septuagint it was translated as nomos, which is law, technically. Instruction is what it was. If you commit to what God has already taught you, things are going to turn out just fine, okay? but if you don't, it won't. And they didn't, so it didn't. Yeah. Remember, when they found, when the Israelites found themselves in exile, they had to relook at the traditions that they had held, and they had they found themselves asking the question, how could this have happened to us? How could this have happened to us? And then they already had the Torah, but the Deuteronomistic historian reshapes it and imagines it as pinning it clearly on the fact that, well, you just didn't keep your end of the bargain. You did what Moses told you not to do, and guess what? What happened was exactly what Moses said would happen if you didn't follow what you're supposed to do. And guess what? This is your just desserts from all of that. This is the tenor of the Deuteronomistic theology. Okay, notice it mentions. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I'm commanding, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances. Notice all the different words for the teaching of the Lord. Commandments, decrees, ordinances. Then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. These words, I'm convinced, are supposed to be, are intended to be heard by a hurting community who have experienced the loss of that land, and they are now being given the reasonings like, you really need to let this soak in, that the reason why what happened to you isn't because you're a victim of some powerful force. It was, remember, who overtook them? It was the Babylonians, right? And that's who exiled them. That's where they found themselves. It's on you, though. This is on you. You're not a victim of anything. You brought this on yourself. And I believe this is the beginning of a way of understanding our being at cause for the reality that we experience in the world. This is the way it was for Israel. This is the way it is for us today. We are not victims. If we really want to interact powerfully with our circumstances, let me put it this way. If we really want to interact powerfully with our circumstances, all kinds of things are going on around us. Things have happened to us. Things have happened near us. Horrible things have happened, yes. How can we interact with that in a powerful way? We can interact with it in a powerful way by simply saying, okay, I'm not casting blame here, but I am willing to see myself as at cause. And it's just a theory, it's just a position to take that gives us power that then enables us to regain our power. As long as all we ever do is say, oh, poor us, oh, we're just victims of something that's overtaken us, guess what? There's never going to be any transformation. There's never going to be any growth and development. There's never going to be a time when we can truly step into and claim the power that we're supposed to experience as people of God. Moses is challenging them to do just that. I call on heaven and earth today to witness against you. Oh, by the way, when they were in Babylon, they experienced the same kind of thing they did in Canaan. There were a lot of other gods going on, a lot of worship going on, a lot of stories. It's during this exile in Babylon that they came into contact with those other stories about those other creation myths. The other gods that they had their own stories about how the world came into being and why this and why that, and frequently in ancient Near Eastern covenants and the inanimate objects were called to be as witnesses. They were treated as real witnesses. Well, this is what we get here today. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today. Heaven and earth. One of the things that progresses in the thinking of the exilic community is their realization that God, as their creator, is the creator of those things that other people treat as gods. Oh. And so the exile becomes a time when they truly step into understanding the position of their God with regard to the entire world and the entire creation. Instead of worshiping that which was created, they find themselves directed towards worshiping the Creator, as opposed to what the other religions were doing. This throwdown, if you will, of Moses capitulates the wanderings. He dies shortly after, and he has a kind of like almost an ordination, if you will, of Joshua, and that's when they move on in to the land of promise. But with this foreboding sense of we already know this isn't gonna go well. Got to remember, the situation where this is being read was after failure. Yeah. And this recasts that failure in a sense that helps them make sense of it to the point that they can reconstruct their lives and regain their power and regain their sense of obligation to God. Now, in Psalm 119, this is like I said earlier, this is the longest chapter of the Bible. That's because Psalm 119 is actually 22 different psalms, okay? This is an acrostic psalm. Every 8 verses or so starts with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet as a kind of mnemonic device to memorize it. The whole chapter it's pages and pages. But it is something that is written in this time where they rediscover the value of the teaching and are realizing that they did not commit to the teaching. They did not commit to the instruction. They did not commit fully to the Torah. They actually played around with it to the point that it cost them their land of promise. It starts out in verse 1. We're only reading the first 8 verses of this chapter. Happy are they whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord, the Torah. There you go. Happy are they who observe his decrees and seek him with all their hearts, who never do any wrong, but always walk in his ways. This is, this psalm, it starts out with, we call this a macarism, like a blessed art thou, or a beatitude, okay? When we say happy, it could just as easily be translated blessed, okay? This blessing is directed at those who are taking seriously the instruction of God, okay? This represents that time when they are in exile as well, okay? Notice as they continue, the beatitude, the macarism, changes to a direct address to God. Verse 4, you laid down your commandments that we should fully keep them. Oh, that my ways were made so direct that I might keep your statutes. Notice there are a lot of different synonyms for the Torah, the instruction. Okay, we already had decrees. And they had the word his ways. Here we have the word commandments. Here, and we also have the word statutes. Notice verse 6. Then I should not be put to shame when I regard all your commandments. Another synonym. I will thank you with an unfeigned heart when I have learned your righteous judgments. Another teaching. I will keep your statutes. Again, that word. Do not utterly forsake me. This is the opening salvo of a long psalm that is, like I said, an acrostic, and it comes in like segments of like 8 verses each. We do have other segments of it that we hear during our after Pentecost season that we just got done doing. As I'm looking through it, I can see where I've written, like, for example, Proper 24C, which was just last summer, Proper 26C as well, and the like. Anyway, this dedication to the law is all. I'm going to move into our gospel passage today because in our gospel passage we are having the Sermon on the Mount, and in Jesus speaking, remember, he is, as I mentioned in my sermon on when was that? The 29th of January. Matthew presents Jesus as a sort of Moses to the max, okay? And so after the Beatitudes and a few statements about you're the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world, that kind of thing, then he goes into, starting with chapter 5, verse 21, he starts with the what's called the 6 antitheses. You've heard of the 10 Commandments, right? Well, here in the Sermon on the Mount, we get the 6 antitheses. And what an antithesis is you have heard it said, but I say. And he does that 6 times. Now, our reading for the 6th Sunday after the Epiphany is the first 4 of these 6 antitheses. And the last 2 are on for the 7th Sunday after the Epiphany. But we don't ever get to that because the last Sunday of Epiphany comes next week, and we don't get the 7th Sunday. We get the last Sunday, which is always the Transfiguration. So I might actually get to and reference those verses that we don't have in our reading for the 6th Sunday, simply because we'll never get to hear them. But I just want to paint the bigger picture of what Jesus is doing. Let us proceed with Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 to 37. You have heard it said, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on your way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Okay, in Matthew's presentation of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he is reinterpreting the teachings that they have come to understand. Remember, he's actually already stated, that I in verse 17, we started in 21, remember. In verse 17, he says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. So in these 6 antitheses, he takes on some things that we know of from the 10 Commandments, and some of them are from just teachings of later rabbinical authorities. But in this first one, it deals with the whole one of the command. We're familiar with this one, thou shalt not murder, right? And Jesus takes it up. He raises the bar, if you will. In all of these, he's raising the bar And it is an attempt to not just, part of it is to get us to see that, oh, there's no way I can do this. I can never attain to this. That's part of it, but that's not all of it. What we're getting here is a proposed way of being for a community of faith that just way goes beyond. It goes into it goes beyond just trying to check boxes off of a list of do's and don'ts. It's actually a raising of the bar to a level that that puts the highest value on our interpersonal communication. Right? Notice this thing about offering your gift at the altar. If you're trying to complete your cultic responsibilities, your religiosity, the thing about, the going to church and tithing, and that, if you think that just doing that is going to suffice as far as, oh, okay, I'm good with God, I've done exactly what God needs me. He's basically saying, no, that doesn't get you anywhere if you are not in concordance with your people in your life. Notice it says if you have something, you remember, you're bringing your offering to the altar, you remember that you have something against some, you leave it there. Don't even finish that act. That act is totally void of any meaning if there's something standing out with regard to an interpersonal relationship in your life. It puts a very high value on those things that the prophets were railing on and on about, which is, hey, you know what God requires? To love justice and to walk kindly with your God, that kind of thing. This is Jesus reiterating that law of Moses and what the prophets said to the max, okay? This is Matthew's way of presenting Jesus in the most complete way as that King of the Jews, that Son of God that enlightens the world, that it not only subsumes the Torah and the prophets, it takes it to a much bigger place. The second antithesis. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better that you lose one of your members than for the whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. Yeah. Notice the greatly raising the stakes of, at least I didn't do that. Well, at least we know where our thoughts reside, and we know that nobody can convict us of our thoughts because they don't have any video of us doing this or that. Okay, this is a great acceleration, right, of a requirement of it gets down to not just what you do, but where is your head? Where are your intentions? Where is your being? Okay, Jesus is putting emphasis on that. I got to continue here. The third antithesis. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. By the way, later on he'll talk more about divorce, but this was a point of contention in Judaism. Moses, yes, allowed it. It wasn't commanded, it was allowed, okay, in this realm of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife except on the ground of unchastity causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Notice how the onus in the way Jesus is addressing these things are put on the men. okay? And that's because that's the way the emphasis had always been. Now, Jesus actually will say more about this at a later time in Matthew, where it actually addresses women as well, which is interesting because the way the commandments had come to be interpreted, it was clearly addressing men, especially when we saw the thing about adultery and the idea that it was like only it was something that just a man could do because it looks with a woman but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery. Notice the onus is on the men, okay? And the idea here being that it's not like women don't sin in that regard. He's dealing with the problem that was there, okay? The problem that was there, and getting men to see that they are the instigators of these problems. This isn't a problem invented, if you will, by women. It's something that it's like it resides in the realm of the way men are. Not to say women don't do it. It's just that, with great, if you're given a whole lot of honor, if you're given a whole lot of power, a lot of that there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. And I believe that what Jesus is doing here is demonstrating to the men that power that they were given in the way the Torah had come to be interpreted required a degree of responsibility that they had not heretofore attained. Okay? Verse 33. 1, 2, 3. This is the fourth antithesis. I might actually talk about the fifth and the sixth since we don't get to that because of what I talked about earlier. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. By the way he's using all of those are euphemisms for God, okay? So it's basically any kind of swearing by God. I swear to God. Okay, the same thing. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. This is a big deal. Remember, there are some denominations. Is it the Quakers? I can't remember for sure. Is it the Quakers who, or maybe it's the Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe it's both, really take some of these things to heart. It's like they refuse to take any kind of an oath, and it's based on these words. Yeah, interesting. It's just an illustration of how different strains of thought choose to emphasize different aspects of words that come out of Jesus' mouth. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is Jesus reintroducing the impact of our words. Okay, words actually. You've heard the expression. Talk is cheap. Yeah, you've heard the expression, right? Oh yeah, talk is cheap. Anybody can say anything they want. Well, here's the thing. Talk isn't cheap if it weren't for the fact that we cheapen our talk. Yeah, we make our words cheap by the fact that we don't think they have impact. We treat them as like, oh well, it's just something I said. It really doesn't matter. Remember, this was back in the day when before contract law and all of that, right? And if your word didn't mean anything, then what was there to go on, right? You've heard the expression, "Oh, he's a man of his word." Well, that's an expression that is the ideal for the way we are supposed to be with each other, but we lose our integrity when we don't abide by that. We don't treat our words with power. We don't keep our commitments. We don't listen to what the words are coming out of our mouth. We cheapen our talk by not keeping our word. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and mention the last two antitheses here in Matthew chapter 5, even though they're not in this week's reading, and we don't get to hear them because next is the last Sunday of Epiphany. So I'm going to go ahead and read them now. Remember, the 6 antitheses are those things that that are in the Sermon on the Mount, that follow the Beatitudes and the talks and the sayings that Jesus says about it. You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world, and do not think that I've come to abolish the law, I've come to fulfill them. And then he goes into these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 antitheses. These 5 and 6 are coming up now. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer, but if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. The context for this is, okay, now, if you're getting struck on your right cheek, and your right cheek here, that means that somebody is either slapping you with their left, which is not typically the way it's done, or you're getting a backhanded slap from somebody's right hand, okay? And that is something that would happen in society when you are saying something that they don't want to hear. One of the contexts of what we get in the 6 antitheses is the behavior of, how do you be a disciple of Jesus in a world where your Jewish friends are not wanting to hear what you have to say. When you say, oh yeah, my Messiah has come, Jesus is my Messiah, and people will say, oh, that's blasphemy, whap, right? The idea here is from that sense of speaking from the heart and not being afraid to speak your own personal truth about who Jesus is. Notice the thing about if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat and your coat, the verbs here represent a militaristic kind of a thing where Roman soldiers could force you to go. They could commandeer you or your animals or whatever. Notice if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. The idea being, you're not a victim. You're not a victim here. They're intending to punish you, but you should demonstrate that you can respond as one who I got an endless source of this. I'm not living out of a sense of scarcity. I'm living out of a sense of abundance. So you want 1, I'll give you 2. As a way of, it's like one of the things that we had with Paul is like something about when somebody insults you, you shouldn't give it back to them. In that way you heap coals of fire on their head. Well, the idea being demonstrate that you're not a victim. You're being treated, even though you might be being treated as one, you're not. You can actually take the upper hand by taking a different way of being about it, okay? And that's the same thing with the begging and giving. Notice that we're going to go on to the last antithesis. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. By the way, this was not said in the Torah, but yet this came to be a way of being with regard to the rabbinic teaching. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Remember, this is part of the context is Christians who have said Jesus is my Messiah and the conflict that resulted as a result of that, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. Notice the emphasis about the Yahwistic belief of that God created the sun, God created the weather. They're like there aren't rain gods, there aren't sun gods. All that's from God, from Yahweh, this is a different teaching than they were hearing that they had heard in their exilic days. Notice this thing about so that you may be children of your Father. Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. When it says that so that you may be children of your Father in heaven, it is emphasizing that so that we can experience the same thing that God experiences. Yeah, pray for those who persecute you, love your enemies, so that you may be children of the Father, of your Father in heaven. We experience what it's like for God when we ourselves are loving those who don't love us, and we actively seek the well-being of those who are out to get us, okay? Welcome to God's world. It's like God is saying, yeah, you do that. You want to know what it's like being God? You do that, and then come back and talk to me. I believe this is what's going on. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Nobody liked tax collectors, right? And it's like this, it was presumed, yeah. And some people believe that this is actually written by Levi, who is also called Matthew, the tax collector. And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. This is not a command. This is a declaration in the future tense. You will be perfect. Okay, you will be perfect. You will get a chance to experience what it's like to be God. What it's like to be God, it means that you are just letting all of what's going on around you, you're just letting it flow. You're just letting it flow. It is what it is, and you get to be who you get to be, and circumstances don't determine how you be. I got to talk about the Corinthians passage here because I only have a few minutes left. The Corinthians passage, chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. And so, brothers and sisters, I could not speak to you as spiritual people, but rather as people of the flesh, as infants in Christ. One of the things that he had just got done saying was, but we have the mind of Christ. Oh, a great thing. And he had been talking about wisdom of the world and all that. Now listen to him. I fed you with milk, not solid food. For you were not ready for solid food. Even now, you are still not ready. For you are still of the flesh. For as long as there is jealousy and quarreling among you, you are not of the flesh and behaving. Are you not of the flesh and behaving according to human inclinations? Doesn't this sound a little familiar to the kinds of things we read in the other readings with regard to what does it look like to be God's people in the world? When one says, I belong to Paul, and another, I belong to Apollos, are you not merely human? What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord assigned to each. Remember, one of the things Paul talked about earlier was their dividing themselves up and I'm a big fan of Paul. I'm a big fan of Apollos. I'm a Christ man myself. And that kind of a thing. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. When the kingdom of God gets put out there, nobody gets to take claim and say, yeah, look what I did. And we've got to give it up for when we see the word of God taking root and being activated in the world, regardless of whether it emanates from the church. I think this is a part of what we need to see. The one who plants and the one who waters have a common purpose, and each will receive wages according to the labor of each. For we are God's servants, working together. You are God's field, God's building. This is fun. This is, like I said before, for the 12th. And I think I'm also preaching. Yes, I'm preaching on this Sunday. So we'll see you in church. Until then, peace.